Snow pressed against the shoulder of a rural road, mooting sound as a state trooper lifted a tarp and paused. Breath hung in the air. A notebook lay half buried. Tire impressions curved away. The radio crackled once, then went quiet as December settled around a discovery that refused explanation. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. The road cut through the outskirts of Derry, New Hampshire, a town that in late December of 1989 carried the habits of winter without spectacle. Plowed banks narrowed lanes. Store windows glowed early. The discovery did not arrive with sirens or crowds. It arrived with procedures. The trooper logged time and temperature. Photographs were taken. The scene was measured, documented, and left to cold. The woman was identified hours later as Emily Hartwell, 23 years old, a resident of a nearby apartment complex built during the 70s when the town still imagined growth. Her name would not be spoken aloud at the scene. It would be written, checked, confirmed. Emily Hartwell had been reported missing 2 days earlier, on December 22nd, after failing to arrive at a holiday shift at a local nursing home. The missing person flyer had been taped to a corkboard near the courthouse and to the glass door of a gas station on Route 28. It described a young woman with brown hair, a practical winter coat, and a habit of taking back roads to avoid traffic. The flyer carried a phone number that would ring unanswered through Christmas Eve. Initial assessments were restrained. There were no obvious signs of a struggle visible to passers-by. The position of the body suggested exposure rather than spectacle. The medical examiner would later note hypothermia as a contributing factor, with blunt force trauma inconsistent with an accidental fall. These conclusions were provisional, written in pencil, subject to revision. In 1989, New Hampshire laboratories processed evidence slowly. Samples were logged and stored. Chain of custody mattered more than speed. The timeline began to form from the last ordinary movements of a life. On December 21st, Emily completed a morning class at Manchester Community College. She stopped at a grocery store to buy cranberries and bread, a receipt later recovered from her coat pocket. She called her mother in Laconia to confirm Thanksgiving plans had changed to Christmas Day, a small family adjustment common that year as weather interfered with travel. A neighbor recalled seeing her car leave the parking lot at dusk, headlights on, defroster working hard against sleet. Investigators canvassed methodically. They spoke to coworkers, instructors, and tenants in the apartment complex. No conversations were recorded theatrically. Notes were taken. Times were compared. A maintenance worker reported a broken exterior light near the parking area that week. A cashier recalled Emily asking for directions around road construction. None of it pointed cleanly anywhere. The car was found the following afternoon, abandoned but locked, several miles from where she was discovered, parked near a snowmobile trailhead used by hunters during Thanksgiving and by teenagers after the first storms. The autopsy, conducted under fluorescent lights in Concord, avoided flourish. Injuries were catalogued. The cause of death was determined as homicide, the manner restrained, the language clinical. Fingernail scrapings were collected. Fibers were bagged. The report emphasized uncertainty. Time of death could not be pinpointed beyond a broad window that included the longest nights of the year. Media coverage followed a predictable arc. The local paper ran a brief on page 3, then a longer weekend piece that included a photograph provided by the family. Television stations from Boston aired a 30-second segment between weather updates. The story competed with holiday travel advisories and late-season football. By New Year's Day, attention had thinned. Snow erased tracks. Leads cooled. Through January and February, detectives returned to the file between other calls. They mapped Emily's route choices. They compared similar incidents statewide and found none that matched. A composite was sketched and released based on a sighting from a truck driver who recalled a stranded vehicle on a cold evening, though his recollection shifted under questioning. The composite generated tips, most of them vague. Each was logged. Each was closed. The case entered what records later called inactive status in the spring of 1990. Boxes were labeled and shelved in a municipal building that smelled of dust and radiator heat. Evidence remained intact. The family waited. Birthdays passed. Thanksgiving returned with its routines. Christmas lights went up again along the same roads. The flyer yellowed. Years later, advances in forensic science altered the meaning of stored evidence. In the late 1990s, New Hampshire began reviewing unsolved homicides for biological material suitable for DNA testing. Emily Hartwell's case qualified. Fingernail scrapings, preserved properly, were sent to the state laboratory. The results were partial but promising. A male profile emerged, incomplete yet distinct. It did not match any entry in existing databases. Investigators reconstructed the timeline again, this time with distance. They re-interviewed witnesses, careful not to contaminate memory. A neighbor now recalled a man lingering near the parking lot during the week before Christmas, offering jumper cables. A second witness placed a similar man at the trailhead near the abandoned car. These accounts, once isolated, began to align geographically. In 2005, a task force was formed quietly. It included a detective nearing retirement, a younger analyst comfortable with databases, and a prosecutor known for patience. They reviewed employment records, focusing on seasonal laborers present during the holidays in 1989. Snowplow crews, delivery drivers, temporary construction hands. One name appeared repeatedly in proximity logs and time cards. Mark Delaney, then 31, a subcontracted plow operator who worked nights along the same routes Emily used. Delaney had moved several times since 1989, drifting through New England. His record included minor offenses, nothing violent. He was interviewed in 2006. He denied knowing Emily Hartwell. His account of December 1989 placed him working long shifts during storms, corroborated partially by payroll records that showed hours but not locations. A buccal swab was requested. He declined. Without probable cause, the investigation paused again, but the name stayed highlighted in the file. The breakthrough came not with drama but with paperwork. In 2018, a distant relative of Delaney submitted DNA to a public genealogy database. Analysts, following legal protocols, identified a familial match to the partial profile from Emily's fingernails. The connection narrowed the pool to a small family cluster. A judge approved further testing. Delaney was located in Maine, working maintenance at a warehouse. A search warrant authorized collection of discarded items. The laboratory comparison completed the chain. The profile matched. The probability calculations were conservative, expressed in ratios that satisfied evidentiary standards. Additional corroboration followed. Fiber analysis linked material from Delaney's work jacket, preserved from a 1990 inventory photograph, to fibers recovered from Emily's coat. Tire impressions, once too broad to matter, aligned with the make and tread of a plow truck assigned to Delaney that winter. Delaney was arrested in December, nearly 30 years after the discovery, as snow returned to the same roads. The arraignment was brief. The charges were read. The community reacted with restraint. The local paper ran a headline that emphasized resolution rather than outrage. At trial, the evidence was presented sequentially. The jury deliberated. A verdict was reached. The legal outcome closed the file. Delaney was convicted and sentenced according to statute. The language of the judgment avoided poetry. It cited facts, dates, and exhibits. Emily Hartwell's name was entered into the record one last time. Afterward, the evidence was catalogued again, now marked resolved. The family attended a quiet service that Christmas. The road was plowed. The town continued. In the months following sentencing, administrative tasks filled the space where uncertainty had lived. Notifications were sent to agencies. Databases were updated. Training materials referenced the case as an example of preservation done correctly. Detectives retired. New officers read the file without the weight of waiting. The apartment complex replaced its exterior lights. The gas station changed owners. The corkboard was cleared for new notices. Winter returned, as it does, measured and indifferent. Emily Hartwell's mother declined interviews. She accepted the paperwork and returned home. On Christmas Eve, she placed a candle in the window, a habit kept without announcement. The investigation's end did not restore time. It restored accuracy. The record now reflected what had occurred on a cold December night in New Hampshire, and how patience, method, and lawful process eventually spoke when weather and years had tried to erase them. Snow fell again on the shoulder of the road. Trucks passed. Radios crackled and went quiet. The file remained on the shelf complete. The town remembered without ceremony and moved forward, carrying winter the way it always had. No plaques were installed, no speeches followed. Closure arrived as a line drawn under facts and the quiet understanding that careful work kept intact can wait. Winter passed, record stayed, memory settled, truth held, in silence. End. Winter returned to New Hampshire with the same habits it always kept, and the Hartwell file returned to desks with similar regularity. In early 1990, the case moved through formal stages that rarely draw attention. Evidence receipts were checked. Photographs were numbered and sleeved. The autopsy report was finalized and signed, its language deliberately narrow, describing findings without speculation. Hypothermia was listed as contributory, not causal, a distinction that mattered to prosecutors even then. Blunt force trauma was recorded with measurements and angles, consistent with an assault that had not been prolonged. Nothing in the report suggested rage. Everything suggested efficiency. Investigators mapped Emily Hartwell's movements with care, using road atlases folded and refolded along the same creases. Her route from the community college to her apartment was typical for the time of day, avoiding downtown traffic during the holiday rush. Weather records showed intermittent sleet beginning after sunset on December 21st, worsening toward midnight. Plow schedules were requested from the state and from private contractors. The lists were long. Names blurred together. The file grew heavier. Witness interviews continued into February. A clerk at a convenience store near the college remembered a young woman buying coffee late, a small deviation from Emily's normal habits, possibly explained by exam stress. A resident near the trailhead recalled engine noise after midnight, unusual for that location, but could not identify the vehicle. These statements were transcribed, initialed, and stored. None rose to the level of probable cause. All were retained. The abandoned car presented its own problems. It was clean, almost carefully so, no visible blood, no personal items missing beyond a notebook later found near the body. The keys were not recovered. The vehicle was processed twice, once at the scene and again in a heated bay to allow for closer inspection. Fibers were collected from the seats and floor mats. Tire tracks near the trailhead were photographed, their impressions softened by fresh snow. Measurements were taken anyway. In 1989, the belief in future utility guided such work. By spring, the case had exhausted immediate leads. The prosecutor's office reviewed the file and agreed there was insufficient evidence to proceed. The designation inactive did not mean forgotten. It meant preserved. Boxes were sealed and stored in a municipal archive room with controlled temperature, a precaution that would later prove decisive. The Hartwell family marked holidays quietly. Thanksgiving came with familiar dishes and an empty chair. Christmas followed, lights placed on the same schedule, wreaths hung because routine felt safer than disruption. Emily's name appeared in the paper once more on the anniversary, a brief remembrance noting her age and the request for information. The phone rang once with a tip that went nowhere. During the 1990s, the investigative landscape shifted. DNA analysis matured from promise to practice. Cold cases across the country were reopened selectively. New Hampshire established criteria that favored cases with preserved biological material and clear chains of custody. Emily Hartwell's file met those standards. In 1997, fingernail scrapings were retrieved from storage and logged for testing. The laboratory report that followed was cautious, describing a partial male profile that excluded known associates and family members. It did not identify a suspect. It did something else. It created a future hinge. The next decade brought incremental movement. Detectives assigned to the cold case unit reviewed the file annually. They updated contact information for witnesses. They requested records from defunct businesses, tracking where possible the seasonal workers who had passed through town in 1989. Technology helped but did not solve. Databases expanded. Patterns were sought and dismissed. The file remained open without noise. In 2004, a re-examination of the trailhead photograph revealed something previously overlooked. A reflective strip visible in one frame matched safety markings used on certain plow trucks at the time. This observation did not stand alone. It joined a cluster of small consistencies that began to point toward night work along secondary roads. Investigators compiled a list of contractors active during the storms that week. Employment records were incomplete, but one name recurred in time sheets and dispatch notes. Mark Delaney appeared on multiple routes intersecting Emily's likely path. Delaney's background was unremarkable. He had grown up in New Hampshire, left school early, and worked seasonal jobs. In December 1989, he operated a privately owned plow truck under contract, often alone, often at night. His routes changed with the weather. He lived transiently, renting rooms near job sites. None of this was incriminating. It was context. When detectives interviewed Delaney in 2006, they did so without accusation. The meeting was documented in a standard report. Delaney acknowledged working storms that winter. He denied knowing Emily Hartwell or encountering a stranded motorist. He consented to photographs of his hands and clothing, a formality. He declined DNA testing. The refusal was noted, not argued. Without additional evidence, the investigation paused again, but Delaney's name remained indexed. The decisive turn arrived through genealogy, a tool governed by evolving legal standards. In 2017, analysts were authorized to use publicly available databases for familial searches in violent crimes. The partial profile from Emily's case was uploaded under supervision. Months passed. A distant relative's submission produced a match consistent with the profile's markers. The probability did not identify a person. It identified a family. Investigators built family trees, cross-referencing ages, locations, and employment histories. The process was slow and careful. Delaney's branch aligned with the geographic and temporal constraints. Surveillance was authorized. Trash pulls were conducted lawfully. A discarded coffee cup provided a sample. The laboratory comparison was conclusive within accepted statistical thresholds. The match linked Delaney to biological material under Emily Hartwell's fingernails. Corroboration followed as required. Fiber analysis compared samples collected decades earlier to known materials used in Delaney's work gear. The match was not singular but cumulative, adding weight rather than spectacle. Vehicle records confirmed the make and tread of the plow truck assigned to Delaney matched measurements taken near the trailhead. Dispatch logs placed him on duty in the relevant window. The case moved from possibility to charge. Delaney was arrested without incident. The booking photograph showed a man aged by time, not by notoriety. The charging documents outlined facts in plain language. At trial, the prosecution presented evidence sequentially, emphasizing preservation and process. The defense challenged memory and motive, but could not dislodge the physical linkage. The jury returned a guilty verdict after deliberation measured in hours, not days. Sentencing followed statutory guidelines. The judge referenced the duration of uncertainty and the restraint of the investigation. The sentence reflected severity without excess. Appeals were filed and denied. The conviction stood. Afterward, the Hartwell file was updated one final time. Evidence was marked resolved. Training bulletins summarized the case for future investigators, emphasizing chain of custody and patience. The town absorbed the news quietly. There were no marches. There were editorials that spoke of relief rather than triumph. Emily Hartwell's name appeared once more in print attached to the word solved. Winter continued its cycles. Roads were plowed by different men. The trailhead saw new tracks each season. The archive room remained cool and orderly. The case, now closed, rested among others, a record of how time, when met with method, can be answered. Christmas came again, unremarkable and complete. The years between arrest and final appeal unfolded without drama, recorded in calendars and docket numbers rather than headlines. Court dates were scheduled and rescheduled, motions filed and answered. Winter hearings took place under fluorescent lights while snow traced familiar lines outside the courthouse. The record expanded with transcripts and exhibits, each page stamped and numbered. The case moved forward because procedure required it, not because anyone hurried. For investigators, the work shifted from discovery to explanation. They prepared summaries that traced the arc from 1989 to resolution, careful to note where technology had changed and where fundamentals had not. Evidence preservation was emphasized again and again. The fingernail scrapings, the fibers, the photographs softened by snow but sharpened by patience. Each item had waited without decay because someone had sealed it properly decades earlier. This was not romance. It was discipline. The prosecution's theory remained narrow. Emily Hartwell had encountered Mark Delaney during a winter night when roads were slick and visibility poor. He had been working alone, equipped to stop, to offer assistance to control the situation. The evidence suggested contact, struggle, transfer. It suggested abandonment near a trailhead chosen for familiarity and access. It suggested a return to work afterward, routes completed, logs signed. It did not suggest panic. It suggested calculation, bounded by weather and routine. The defense explored alternative explanations without success. The jury heard about the limits of memory, the fallibility of witnesses, the passage of time. They also heard about probabilities, about how independent lines of evidence converged. The language remained measured. There were no reenactments. Charts were simple. The verdict reflected acceptance of method. After sentencing, administrative closure began. Notices were sent to national databases. The cold case designation was removed. The file was scanned for digital archiving, though the original boxes remained intact, a parallel record. The town clerk updated the registry. The medical examiner amended the manner of death. Each change was logged. For the Hartwell family, the end arrived without ceremony. They attended the final hearing and returned home the same day. Thanksgiving followed with its familiar menu and quieter table. Christmas lights were placed carefully, as they had been every year. Emily's mother kept the candle in the window on Christmas Eve, not for attention but for continuity. The habit had outlasted uncertainty and now persisted beyond it. Local media revisited the case once more, summarizing decades in a few paragraphs. The tone was restrained, reflecting the town's preference for understatement. There were references to improved forensic tools and to the diligence of investigators. There were no calls for spectacle. Letters to the editor thanked unnamed professionals and moved on. Within the department, the case became instructional. New hires read the summary during winter training sessions. They learned about evidence that seems small at first and about the patience required when answers do not come quickly. They learned about the importance of writing things down and sealing them away properly. The Hartwell case joined a small group of files used to teach restraint. Mark Delaney entered the correctional system quietly. Intake photographs replaced booking images. His work history ended in records rather than roots. Appeals exhausted themselves against the same evidence that had persuaded a jury. The sentence held. Time resumed its ordinary accounting. The place where Emily was found changed little. Snow fell. Plows passed. The shoulder was widened slightly during a later road project, and the trailhead received new signage. Hikers and snowmobilers used it without knowledge of what had occurred there decades earlier. The notebook recovered at the scene remained an exhibit, its pages blank except for grocery lists and reminders. It testified to ordinary plans interrupted. The apartment complex replaced its exterior lights after a series of unrelated incidents. The maintenance log noted the date. A small change, unconnected and yet resonant, completed a circle begun with a broken fixture mentioned early in the investigation. No one claimed it as symbolic. It was simply done. As years accumulated after the verdict, the case receded into the background of institutional memory. Detectives retired, analysts transferred. The archive room remained cool. Boxes were checked annually for condition. Labels stayed legible. The file remained complete. Seasonal rhythms continued to shape the town. Thanksgiving traffic increased along Route 28. Christmas trees appeared on car roofs. New Year's Eve brought modest celebrations, fireworks limited by ordinance. Winter storms arrived on schedule and plow trucks followed, different drivers in similar vests, reflective strips catching headlights in the dark. Emily Hartwell's name appeared less often in public spaces, but it remained in the record, accurate and settled. The purpose of the investigation had not been to create a story. It had been to establish what happened, when, and by whom, and to do so within the law. That purpose had been met. In the quiet aftermath, the meaning of resolution revealed itself as absence rather than presence. The absence of unanswered questions, the absence of speculation, the absence of the file from lists marked unsolved. What remained was a sequence of facts held together by care. On a late December afternoon years later, a state trooper drove the same stretch of road during routine patrol. Snow edged the shoulder. The radio crackled once and went quiet. There was nothing to note, nothing to log. The patrol continued. The case had begun with winter and ended with winter, framed by holidays that marked time regardless of circumstance. Thanksgiving had come and gone. Christmas followed. New Year's turned. Through it all, the record held steady. Truth did not hurry. It waited, preserved, until it could be spoken plainly and then set down, complete in the cold, orderly language of closure. Time moved on without ceremony, as it does in places where resolution arrives quietly. The Hartwell case settled into the long shelves of closed investigations, its spine marked solved, its contents unchanged. The facts no longer shifted. They rested. For those who had worked the file, that stillness carried its own weight. It meant there would be no more calls to make, no more comparisons to run, no more winter nights spent rereading reports under yellowed light. The work was finished, and finishing carried relief only in modest measure. In Derry and the neighboring towns, the name Emily Hartwell slowly receded from daily thought. It remained known but no longer raw. People remembered her as a photograph in a newspaper and as a date on a calendar. The younger residents learned of the case indirectly, through mention rather than memory. Older men, retired or nearing it, recalled the winter of 1989 clearly, the storms that closed schools, the long plow routes, the sense that something had gone wrong without explanation. For them, the resolution did not rewrite the past. It placed it in order. Law enforcement agencies conducted their final reviews. Internal audits confirmed that procedures had been followed correctly. Evidence storage protocols were cited as exemplary. The genealogy component was documented carefully, its legal authorization emphasized to avoid misinterpretation. The case became a reference point in policy discussions, not for its notoriety but for its patience. It demonstrated that restraint could coexist with persistence, that waiting was sometimes an active choice rather than a failure. The courthouse returned to its routines. Files moved across counters. Judges heard new cases that carried their own urgencies. The Hartwell matter appeared only as a citation in appellate summaries, then not at all. Clerks archived transcripts. Boxes were transferred to long-term storage. The legal system absorbed the conclusion and continued, indifferent and exacting. For Emily Hartwell's family, life remained shaped by absence but no longer by uncertainty. They spoke her name at holidays without hesitation. Thanksgiving meals included stories of her childhood. Christmas ornaments were placed that had once belonged to her, small gestures that acknowledged continuity rather than loss. There was no public statement marking closure. There was simply the private understanding that nothing further would be asked of them by the state. Mark Delaney's conviction aged into routine. His name appeared in institutional rosters and nowhere else. The appeal window closed. Administrative notices confirmed finality. The case ceased to generate paperwork. Time resumed its ordinary function. The physical locations connected to the investigation changed subtly. The road shoulder where Emily was found was repaved, its edges smoothed. The trailhead received a new map board. Snowbanks formed and melted in cycles, erasing and rebuilding the landscape. The apartment complex updated its signage. The gas station replaced its pumps. These changes carried no symbolism for the town. They were simply maintenance. Every December, weather reports returned to familiar language. Snow totals, wind advisories, travel cautions. Plow trucks rolled out on schedule, their reflective strips flashing briefly in headlights before disappearing into dark. The routines that had framed the crime remained, stripped now of mystery. They were work, not omen. Within police training rooms, the Hartwell case was referenced less often as years passed. New examples replaced it. Technology advanced again. Databases grew. Yet the fundamental lesson remained intact, transmitted quietly by instructors who had known the file. Preserve everything. Write carefully. Assume time will pass. Assume the future will ask questions the present cannot answer. There were no memorials erected along the road. No markers announced what had occurred there. The absence felt appropriate. The purpose of the investigation had not been remembrance. It had been accuracy. That purpose had been fulfilled. As the 30th anniversary of Emily Hartwell's death passed, the local paper noted it briefly, a single column acknowledging that the case had been resolved and that the sentence remained in effect. The piece ended without flourish. Readers turned the page. Life continued. In the quiet calculus of cold cases, success is measured not by drama but by alignment. Facts align with evidence. Evidence aligns with law. Law aligns with outcome. When alignment holds, the noise falls away. What remains is a record that can be read without speculation and closed without regret. Winter continued to return to New Hampshire, steady and impartial. Thanksgiving marked the start of shorter days. Christmas followed with its lights and routines. New Year's arrived, resetting calendars. These cycles had framed the beginning of the Hartwell case and now framed its end. The passage of time did not diminish what had happened. It contextualized it. Emily Hartwell's life remained defined by more than its final night. Records reflected her education, her work, her plans. The investigation, in its conclusion, preserved those details alongside the facts of her death. She was not reduced to a file number. She was documented as a person whose absence required explanation and whose explanation had been found. The cold case designation was removed, but the memory of the work endured among those who value method over haste. In that sense, the case did not vanish. It settled, like snow after a storm, covering sharp edges and leaving a surface that could finally be walked without fear of falling through. There was nothing more to add. The timeline was complete. The evidence had spoken. The court had ruled. The town had absorbed the truth and moved forward. In the end, resolution looked less like an ending than a return to ordinary days, unremarkable and intact, carrying winter as they always had, and leaving one long December night where it belonged, fixed in record, no longer unanswered.